Hello and welcome to Newsline. I'm Sarah Oliver.
And I'm Yusuf Saudi. Today on the program, a group of farmers in Victoria's West fight for their land, a new drug giving eczema sufferers new life, and graduate visa holders stranded overseas.
And we'll also have updates across sports, finance and weather. But first, to today's headlines.
Today marks the first day for Victorians in lockdown with 4 new local cases and 2 from overseas. Nearly 50,000 people have been tested in the last 24 hours.
The list of COVID-19 exposure sites has grown by over 100. This includes gyms, restaurants, cafes and other shops found by contact tracers. There are 5 places that are of particular concern, which include the Sporting Globe in Mordialloc, Three Monkeys Bar in Pran, Somewhere Bar also in Pran, the Palace Hotel in South Melbourne, and the Local in Port Melbourne.
There are currently about 20% of adults who've received their first dose of the COVID-19 jab. Nearly 4 million vaccine doses have been given, but the current target is about 13 million. Acting Premier James Merlino says vaccine doses have reached a milestone in Victoria.
Sorry, we're just having some technical difficulties there. We'll be right back with you very soon.
What do you think about that right now, Sarah?
With the vaccines, it's a bit of it's interesting news. It's sort of, we would hope that there would be more people vaccinated by now. I think we can all, mostly. And we're about to hear from James Merlino.
Administered both through our state sites and through our
Two vehicles were impounded early this morning by Highway Patrol in Lalor. The vehicles were allegedly travelling at a speed of 170 kilometres an hour. A 58-year-old Taylor's Lakes man and a 41-year-old Cairnley man are expected to be charged on summons with traffic offences, including driving at a dangerous speed.
The Victorian State Library has appointed Christine Christian as AO as their first female board president. The announcement was made this morning on Twitter. The Victorian State Library account said they are looking forward to working with Christine to build on the legacy of John Wiley.
And good news for conservationists in New South Wales. A group of Tasmanian devil joeys have been born in a wild sanctuary in Barrington Tops. Aussie Ark, the team behind the project, said they aim to produce a population of Tasmanian devils on mainland Australia. In late last year, they released 26 adults, including 7 reproductive females, who have now given birth to 7 healthy joeys.
Now to our first story. Regional Victoria is known for its beautiful landscapes and fresh produce, but all of that could change if a plan to build a network of transmission towers into Melbourne goes ahead. Sarah Oliver reports.
In the Ballarat region, just west of Melbourne, locals and farmers have been fighting against plans for a transmission network that could have the potential to damage communities in the area. AusNet have been contracted by the Australian energy market operator to build overhead towers to bring renewable energy from Western Victoria into Melbourne. But those opposed to the plan say the high-value production this land provides hasn't been considered.
It's basically, let's just put the cheapest and the nastiest infrastructure in. However, it's going to be infrastructure that'll be here and for the rest of time. Why not do the job properly, spend a bit of money, make sure that it's going to promote the growth of the economy?
Although objections to the towers have been made clear, those protesting are not against the plans for generating renewable energy.
We're green, we're farmers, we look after the land, we don't want to see it torn up and destroyed. We're probably as green as anyone.
Many family-run businesses fear they may go out of business if the project goes ahead.
We're just mainly concerned of the dying jobs in the agriculture field, so we want to keep the farming industry going as long as we can. Just want to let people know from Melbourne where their food actually comes from and how we grow it. It doesn't just come off the shelves. There's a lot more behind it.
This message is being used to draw attention to the issue, both for locals and anyone travelling through. These signs caught the attention of federal member for Ballarat, Catherine King, who spoke in Parliament last month.
AusNet needs to do better. The Morrison and the Andrews governments need to pay attention to this issue and make sure that those behind the project actually get it right.
But if the project does go ahead, this landscape behind me is where the network will cut through.
If you lose a food bowl like this within 100 k's of Melbourne, you might have the power to turn the fridge light on, but the fridge might be bloody empty too.
Sarah Oliver, Newsline.
We're heading to a short break now. Coming up, we'll be hearing about a decrease in foot traffic across Melbourne CBD stores. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Newsline. The federal court this month ruled environmental protection laws are powerless to stop illegal logging in Victoria. Environmental groups protested in the state's Central Highlands, calling for an end to logging in native forests. Warwick Jones reports.
This is Talangi State Forest, where Victoria's publicly owned logging company, Vic Forests, is harvesting native trees for paper. Despite public outcry and nearly a dozen court cases, the state government has refused to stop logging native forests like this one.
So I'm on my way to meet Steve Meacher, who's the president of Friends of the Leadbeater Possum, which is the organisation that brought action against Vic Forests for illegal logging activity that was destroying the habitat of the leadbeater possum, which is an endangered species.
The decision to go to court in the first place was not taken lightly, given that we were watching logging trucks rumbling through our communities day after day, week after week, carrying habitat off the mountains. We decided that going to court was basically the last resort.
In May last year, the federal court agreed that Vic Forests had broken the law while logging in Victoria's Central Highlands, which includes Talangi. But in May this year, that decision was overturned on a technicality, despite the fact the court found Vic Forests had still breached state law.
So logging is not being conducted legally in our forests. It's clearly being conducted unlawfully, but the federal court could do nothing about those breaches under state law.
The court found that logging is exempt from the federal law designed to protect endangered species, like the leadbeater's possum and the greater glider.
Whatever greater gliders were living up in these trees would now starve, because when you cut down a tree and just leave it standing there, there's no food for it, there's nothing. It takes about a week for them to just perish.
We are in the middle of an extinction crisis. We're seeing declines in forest-dependent species all across the nation.
Since 2000, the population of greater gliders in the Central Highlands has decreased by 80%, and the critically endangered leadbeater's possum by half. Coupled with the effects of climate change and more frequent bushfires, logging native forests could devastate Victoria's biodiversity.
It's harder for us to actually mitigate against the impacts of climate change and to stop massive wildfires, but we can manage timber harvesting. We don't have to log native forest.
Warwick Jones, Newsline.
And now we have Zahra Ahmed joining us for international news.
Yusuf, that story that Warwick just did on that the logging was quite intense. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was. I thought it was very interesting. It definitely made me think about logging in a different way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Also, very interesting package of yourself as well. Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
interesting story. Can you tell me
Yeah, it was a really
what?
interesting story, and speaking to the farmers was really great, but also, you know, it was a bit bittersweet. They were all really lovely, and they're all very concerned for their futures, and yeah, it is an ongoing story, so we'll see how it develops and if anything changes.
Yeah, it definitely does sound like something where, yeah, time will tell, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Apologies to the audience, we're just having some technical difficulties, so we're going to head straight into our next story. Australians with the autoimmune disease eczema rejoicing after a new drug claiming significant improvements to dry, itchy skin was added onto the PBS in February. Eleanor Wilson reports on how Dupixent is giving eczema sufferers a new lease on life.
Struggling to find a solution to her severe eczema, in September last year, Ella Hodges started on the drug Dupixent.
The best improvement is the itch factor, and that I'm not as sore and I don't bleed as much as I did before.
While the 18-year-old says she saw great improvements in her skin on the drug, Dupixent came with a hefty price tag of $1,600 per month.
We had to really rethink, can we afford it? How much longer can we afford it for?
That was until late February this year, when Dupixent was listed on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, slashing its price to around $41 per prescription.
Where Dupixent has a role is for those patients who just don't respond as well to these standard treatments and with good compliance as well. It offers another way to treat eczema by decreasing the amount of inflammation.
Teacher Jacinta Francis started on Dupixent as part of a clinical trial in March last year, and says specialists were astounded by her results.
I had a 95% improvement, which they said is unheard of. So I went from covered to clear. I have no eczema on my body now, nothing.
And how does that make you feel?
Oh, $1 million. I just want to tell the world how amazing it is.
Dupixent is now available under the PBS for moderate to severe eczema sufferers aged 12 and over. To assess their eligibility, patients will need a referral to a skin specialist, and if approved, it's believed many Australians who suffer with the skin condition can hold hope for an itch-free future.
It is going to change a lot of people's lives, and I'm so glad that it's changed mine as well.
Eleanor Wilson, Newsline.
Apologies for those technical issues beforehand. Now we have Zahra Ahmed joining us for international news.
Today, Black Lives Matter founder Patrisse Cullors down. Cullors has advocated for human rights for over 20 years. She started the foundation in 2013 in acquittal of George Zimmerman, who was charged with shooting black teenager Trayvon Martin. Cullors has said that she is stepping down to projects. Her resignation comes after recent criticism from right-wing groups of purchase of multiple million-dollar properties. However, she maintains that her decision to leave the organization wasn't in recent revelations. In the next story, the United Nations Human Rights Council has opened an inquiry into the Israel-Gaza conflict. The committee will investigate the 11-day strife between Israeli and Palestinian groups for war crimes and systematic abuses. The resolution is calling for a permanent inquiry which would allow Council to monitor and report on human rights violations by these groups. In China, Australian writer Heng Jun has gone on trial after 2 years in detention. Heng Jun was present in court on Thursday, but Australian diplomats were barred from attending the hearing. He was charged with espionage by Chinese authorities in 2019 for alleged crimes. Heng Jun was a former employee of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a recent democracy advocate. And that is all for today's international news.
Thanks, Sarah. We're heading into a break now. We'll be back with you shortly.
After a brutal year of lockdowns, Victoria is now in for another quiet week. Riley Galloway joins us from Edinburgh Gardens to talk about how Victorians are holding up. Riley, this is the 4th lockdown for the state. What kind of response have you seen so far today?
Look, there's certainly a lot of frustration from the community, but the responses I've seen from people today have actually been really quite optimistic. A lot of people out here exercising, walking their dogs, socialising, visiting cafes for takeaway orders. I think people are really cherishing the minutiae of everyday life at the moment that we still have. A lot of people I spoke with were also really happy to be out of the office. We've learned through COVID the benefits of working from home, and I saw today with how busy the park was that people are really making the most of that flexibility.
Yeah, and do you think Victorians are handling this lockdown better than previous ones?
Look, Victorians have braved this before and developed a fair bit of resilience from those lockdowns and better coping mechanisms. And I think as well that this time around we have a much clearer pathway and timeline, and based on conversations I've had with people today, I think that this has really mitigated a lot of the anxiety that people maybe suffered last year.
They're not too bad. I mean, obviously last year was pretty stressful, but I think this year we know what we're doing. The numbers were pretty heartening this morning. I think it's important just to get outside and get a little bit of sunshine and have a coffee, and hopefully we'll get through it.
Many cafes have kept their doors open to serve takeaway food and drinks. How do you think they're going?
It appears we've lost Riley there for the time being. Yusuf,
Yeah,
have you
apologies for that.
been outside at all today? Are you seeing many people?
I have not been outside at all today, unfortunately. I would love to go on a walk like Riley's talking about. Yeah, it sounds like a really good idea to do. What about you?
Yeah. No, I haven't been outside yet today. It's been a busy one here in our virtual studio,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
hopefully we'll get out. And it
Yeah.
appears. And on to our next story. International border closures have left thousands of people on graduate or 485 visas stuck overseas due to COVID-19. Those who are on this visa have spent tens of thousands of dollars as international students while living in Australia. Now their chance to live and work in Australia is ticking away. So these offshore holders are calling to freeze or even extend their visas. Yusuf Saudi investigates.
Kriti has been stuck in India for over a year.
We just came here with a bag full with things just for 1 month. We didn't realize at that time that it's going to be 1 year or more than that.
In February 2020, Kriti and her boyfriend left their home in Adelaide to visit their family in New Delhi. But she wasn't prepared for the COVID border closures in March.
Because he had work priorities, I had work priorities. So if we had knew that there's some COVID situation going on, we wouldn't have applied anyway.
Kriti is under the 485 visa, but now that visa is looking to expire this October for Kriti, and she's demanding action.
So that's a pretty unfair thing because COVID is not our fault. I mean, it just happened. It's everywhere.
Kriti is not alone. Her, along with hundreds of other offshore visa holders, have started a movement called Visa 485 Lives Matter to help them one day return to their life in Australia. The campaign is calling for the government to extend their visas so once international borders open, they can live and work here in Australia again.
For this particular visa subclass, everyone should get extension.
There are people from Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh and India who are a part of this campaign. It's also been discussed in Parliament.
People that already had the visa, I'm wondering whether there could be provision for either an automatic extension to their visa or a provision that would allow them to apply for an extension from overseas.
But some say extending these visas for offshore holders may cause more uncertainty.
They don't really want to be giving lots and lots of temporary entrants an indefinite right to enter at this point, because we don't know if COVID's going to be around in 2023, 2024 even.
RMIT Newsline has approached the Department of Home Affairs for comment. They didn't respond to questions about the possibility of extending offshore visas. In the meantime, Kriti is trying to stay hopeful.
Working with the hope that we will. We are not thinking if we don't. Otherwise, we won't even get there.
Yusuf Saudi, RMIT Newsline. Next, a petition to end unpaid student placements has gained traction over the past couple of weeks. Lauren Bastow has the story.
Across Australia, tertiary students are required to complete unpaid placements for their courses.
These placements are blocking access to education.
Olivia is one of these students and was recently feeling the pressure after a conversation in class.
So we did the maths and it turned out it was a total of 1,000 hours of unpaid work. No payment at all, not even minimum wage. It's just absolute nonsense.
So Olivia wrote a petition to the Victorian government. It's been signed by students like Megan, who've already experienced the difficulties of placements.
You have to take a lot of time off work.
Megan says she's lucky to be in a position where she can save. Her placements are short right now, but soon they'll be full-time commitments.
I'm not going to be working as much, so I won't really have an income coming in, so I'll have to then dip into more of my spendings to be able to afford like groceries and do all that sort of stuff.
Work-integrated learning has become a large part of tertiary education in recent times. But research shows students, especially those already facing inequity, often find it hard to complete placements.
A 2017 study showed students from middle and low SES backgrounds were underrepresented in work-integrated learning participation. Another study that year showed 56% of students struggled financially during placement.
I say, well, you know, just go on Centrelink, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. The problem is, poverty line is up here and the Centrelink benefits are down here, so that's not really an option for so many people.
A spokeswoman from the Victorian Department of Premier and Cabinet said placements are valuable in contributing to students' employability. She also said the Commonwealth Government has primary responsibility for higher education. While students may be doing meaningful work, unpaid placements are legal under the Fair Work Act, as long as they're a requirement of a course.
I wouldn't expect it to be a full wage like you would be in the workforce, but a fraction of it would be really good.
Lauren Bastow, Newsline.
The federal court delivered a landmark ruling yesterday, finding the government has a duty of care to all Australian children to take action on climate change. It's the second time in the world a court has ruled that a government has a duty of care to its citizens with respect to climate action. Reporter Warwick Jones is live with Jack McLean.
Hi Jack, congratulations on yesterday.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
For those of us who don't know, why did 8 young Australians decide to sue the Environment Minister?
Well, yeah, as you said, our clients are 8 young Australians from around the country. They've all been involved with School Strike for Climate over the last several years, and they were looking for another avenue to take their message to. They've taken their message of climate activism to the streets, they've taken it to social media, and now they're taking it to the courtroom. And so that was, I guess, the catalyst of how we ended up in court. And what our clients are trying to do is to ensure a safer future for themselves and for all young Australians around the country.
Injunction to stop the approval of the coal mine in New South Wales, but there were some successes in the case. So what did the judgment say, and was that surprising to you, what they handed down?
Yeah, absolutely. So the judge said a lot of things. The first really important thing that the judge did was accept our client's evidence in relation to climate change harm. That's really, really important. Our clients put on a lot of evidence about how the impacts of climate change are going to have really severe and catastrophic impacts on the health, the well-being, the physical safety, and the economic health of young people in the future. And the judge accepted our evidence, saying that the harms of climate change are catastrophic, and they'll be particularly borne by younger people going forward. So that was the first really important thing that the judge found. The second thing was that on top of that, given that the Minister for the Environment has the responsibility to approve or not approve new coal projects under federal environment legislation, the judge found that the Minister actually has a duty of care to, in the exercise of those powers, take care to avoid causing young people harms that are associated with climate change. And an example of those harms, for example, is the approving of a new coal project where the coal is obviously going to be dug out of the ground and burned, causing CO2 emissions, which then fuels the climate crisis. And we know that the climate crisis has deleterious effects on particularly vulnerable people, including young people. And so that was really the basis of the judge's finding. The judge stopped short of intervening to stop the Minister or making an order to stop the Minister approving this particular coal project. But the case is not over yet. And the judge has asked the parties to confer and make further legal arguments about any orders that the judge might make in relation to that coal project.
And was anything about the judgment surprising to you?
Well, in many ways, I don't think I would call it surprising, but I would call it, this is a novel duty of care. This is a world first. So, bringing this piece of litigation, we were hoping for the best, but it was definitely not guaranteed. It was really encouraging to see a federal judge take a really close look at the evidence we put forward on climate harm and conclude that a novel duty of care was required. It was required that the court accept that and find that. Because the minister has, essentially it's within the minister's purview, it's within the minister's power to prevent this harm, to prevent this coal being dug out of the ground. And the minister has a duty, has a responsibility to protect the children from the harm that would result from that coal being dug out of the ground.
That's fantastic. And even Greta Thunberg sent her congratulations. She called it a huge win for the whole climate movement. What are the implications for Australia and the world? Do you think we're going to see more sort of legal action brought under this duty of care that's been found by the court?
Definitely. I mean, this is a big legal development. In Australia, it's really important because, as I said before, the Environment Minister has a really important role to play in approving new fossil fuel projects. And as scientists tell us around the world, if we're going to avoid catastrophic climate change, we need to stop approving new fossil fuel projects. And so this judgment says that the minister, in considering whether or not to approve new projects, has to consider the climate harm to young people that would entail from that approval. And so that has an impact on all the decisions that the Environment Minister is going to make from now on. And that includes the decision that the minister will make in relation to the Vickery Extension project, which was the coal project subject of this particular court case. But it also extends to other fossil fuel projects that she may consider approving in the future. And look, because this is a common law duty, which is judge-made law, this potentially has ramifications for other common law jurisdictions, such as the UK and the US.
Thanks so much for talking to us, Jack.
Anytime.
Thanks, Warwick. We're now heading to a short break. Coming up next, we have the roundup with, sorry about that, with Kendra Jewell and Sarah Liversidge. Stay with us.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Roundup. I'm Sarah Liversidge.
And I'm Kendra Jewell. In the Roundup, we're going to be looking at some of the biggest story across the tech, arts, politics and news from around the world. And let's start with a look at the global papers.
Nations Human Rights Council will open an international investigation into violations during the recent conflict between Israel and Palestinian groups in Gaza, and into what they describe as systemic abuses in occupied Palestinian territories and in Israel. Palestinian authorities and Hamas have welcomed the investigation, but Israel says it will not be cooperating. In the New York Times today, federal prosecutors in Brooklyn are investigating whether Ukrainian officials were involved in a wide-ranging plan to interfere in the 2020 US election. The investigation began during the final months of the Trump administration, but has not been previously reported.
The New Zealand Herald are leading with a story about a hoax text message that sparked fear over COVID-19 exposure at an event held in Auckland on the Saturday, the 22nd of May. The host of the event received a prank text message and attendees were told they had been exposed to a case of COVID-19. The news comes as Melbourne enters its fourth lockdown with daily numbers hitting 30.
The BBC reports China has denounced US efforts to further investigate claims that COVID-19 originated in a Chinese lab. US President Joe Biden says he expects to release the results of an intelligence report into the origins of the virus later this year. China's foreign ministry rejects the claims and has accused the US of what they describe as political manipulation and blame shifting.
The European Guardian is reporting on Russia's retaliation against a ban on flights entering the Belarusian airspace by refusing to grant permission to European planes flying to Moscow. Russian aviation authorities forced French and Austrian carriers to cancel their flights to the Russian capital after a hijacking incident on Sunday night. And that's all for today's front pages in the world news.
To tech news now, former female Google employees have won a class action status in their gender-biased lawsuit on behalf of nearly 11,000 women working for the tech giant. We're joined by tech reporter Emma Fitzgerald. Emma, what more can you tell us about this lawsuit?
Yeah, Sarah, this is an enormous victory for the women who are fighting for gender equality at Google. Not only can they fight for their own wages now, but they're also fighting on behalf of 10,800 other women. It's been leaked that this may cost Google upwards of $600 million.
The women are alleging Google is paying their female employees substantially less than their male counterparts. Do we know how significant this wage gap is?
Well, the women are alleging that women are being paid approximately $16,800 less a year than men in similar roles to them. Now, this includes a lower base salary, smaller bonuses, less stock.
We've seen similar gender-biased lawsuits come out of Silicon Valley before. What sets this one apart?
We have seen cases like this before where female engineers from Twitter and Microsoft have been knocked back in their attempts to get class action status in their lawsuits. That's really the key difference here, is that it won't just be these 4 women, it'll be nearly 11,000 women.
To our next tech story now, and rideshare operator Uber has recognised the trade union for the first time ever. Emma, what makes this a landmark decision?
This is a landmark decision because Uber is actually the first rideshare company to recognise a union, and they operate in over 60 countries around the world. So for this to happen in Britain, which is one of their largest markets, it sets a precedent for the rest of the world.
This decision comes off the back of a Supreme Court ruling in March. How did that affect this current recognition of the union?
Yeah, well, in March, Uber was fighting for their drivers to not be recognised as workers, but rather as freelancers. Now, when the Supreme Court recognised them as workers, that meant they were entitled to a living wage, it meant they were entitled to a pension, and also things like sick days.
This makes Uber the only private taxi firm in the UK recognising a union. How will this decision affect their rideshare market?
Well, we have seen calls for other rideshare companies to follow their suit. We've seen the leader of the GMB union call for Ola and Lyft to kind of step up and match what Uber is doing. Uber is also in talks with other countries across Europe to kind of instill this similar policy.
Thanks for that, Emma. And that's all for the Tech Roundup.
We are going to be looking at the art news. Some of renowned scientist Stephen Hawking's belongings will be displayed in the London Science Museum, and we'll be hearing about the new Disney movie Cruella. I'm joined by reporter Marianne Geary. So Marianne, can you tell us what's happening with the London Museum and Stephen Hawking?
Yes, so Kendra, this week London Science Museum and Cambridge University Library have acquired late physicist Stephen Hawking's memorabilia. The large range of items includes his wheelchair, landmark papers on theoretical physics, and scripts from The Simpsons. As for Professor Hawking's 10,000-page archive, it is joined with Newton and Charles Darwin at the University Library for the public to access.
Stephen Hawking's items are being displayed at the London Science Museum, will show a lot of his work. Can you tell us where his items will be displayed and what are some of the items we can look forward to seeing?
Yeah, sure. Professor Hawking's highlights will be displayed at London's museum early next year, and the contents of his office space is in Cambridge. So which includes his communication equipment, memorabilia, scientific debates, and office furniture, which is now belongs to the Science Museum Group. On the other hand, his archive of scientific personal papers, like A Brief History of Time, and his collaborative works will be at Cambridge University.
With a large collection of his personal belongings in the museum, why is it important that Professor Hawking's items are at the museum, and what could this mean for the UK's tax bill?
Well, for Professor Hawking, as we all know, is known for his many contributions to the fields of cosmology, black hole, general relativity, and quantum gravity. He studied at the university's Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics from 2002 until shortly before his death in 2018. His work is on space, time, and black holes, has captured the imagination of millions, and has written many popular science books. So many celebrated his achievements in life in 2014 for his biopic, The Theory of Everything. The move, however, means his estate is settled to $7.6 million in inheritance tax, and this will help the UK government's bill.
On to our next story in the Art Roundup. Disney is releasing a new live-action feature film. The 101 Dalmatians prequel titled Cruella is set to follow a similar format to Maleficent and another recent Disney villain film. So Marianne, what more can you tell us about the release of Cruella?
So Kendra, Cruella has been released yesterday. It is streaming and in the cinemas this week, which features Emma Stone playing the main role as one of the Disney's villains. The story was first originated and inspired by Dottie Smith's The Great Dog Robbery before it was published as a 60s animated movie, 101 Dalmatians. The movie is a remake from the original actress, Emma Thompson, who plays Cruella in the animated movie and is now also in Cruella. The Cruella trailer premiered on the 17th February, and people in Australia are really excited about it.
The film will focus on the life of Disney villain Cruella de Vil. It will explore her early life and what led her to become the infamous character we all feared in our childhood. So what is this story about, without any spoilers, of course?
Yes, The story will be about the legendary villain, Cruella de Vil's background of her life as a young designer and her love of fashion. So yes, the movie does follow the format of Maleficent, but it will go even more deeper into Cruella's character. The question everyone wants to know, which is what makes the movie really interesting, is why she wanted to kill the adorable puppies to make fur coats. Cruella, however, is set in the 1970s London during the punk rock revolution, and that's when Estella creates a name for herself in the fashion industry.
The film is set in the early 1980s and apparently has a bit of a punk rock vibe. Marianne, what are the big names in the film?
Well, as you already know, Emma Stone will be the main character, called Estella in Cruella, along with the original two thieves, Goofy Horace, played by Paul Walter Hauser, and Jasper, played by Joel Fry. Emma Thompson will be the revival of Emma Stone in the fashion design industry, and along with Nicole Kidman, Charlie Theron, Demi Moore, and Julianne Moore, rumored to play the Barons. Not only that, a queer character called Artie, played by John McCrea, will be Estelle's friend in Cruella.
Thank you, Marianne. And that's all for our Arts Roundup.
And now for a dose of the chuckles to lighten things up. We're joined by our resident analyst of political humour today, Zach Wheeler. Zach, what have you found the satirists using for inspiration today? Okay, so we've lost Zach, unfortunately.
Yes, sorry about that one. But the first piece of political humor that I found today drew inspiration from the January 6th Commission, which is going through the ringer in America as we speak. It's passed the House, and the whole purpose of this is to just find out what caused those riots. And as you can see, those riots, well, they had a pretty lasting effect on democracy as some people view it. And they are on their way to the Senate, where they are likely to be squashed by Republicans. So, yeah, it depends who's really paying attention to it.
And the local lockdown has been on everyone's mind today. What did the Sydney Morning Herald have to say about that?
Yes, they got Melbourne-based visual journalist Jim Pavlidis onto this one, and he exemplified how the lockdowns are mostly going to snap the hearts of local businesses who no longer have JobKeeper or any other compensation to relieve them of their monetary losses caused by the lockdowns. And, well, like the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chief Executive said today, this lockdown will break some businesses, no doubt about it. So it is a bit of a heartbreaker, but it must be done.
And to our last political cartoon, we're off to the UK. The Guardian is looking at British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and how he's been tackling the pandemic. Zach, what's their take?
It's not a good one. His former ex-chief staff member, Dominic Cummings, came out swinging the other day, claiming that it was perhaps his fault and his administration's fault for sending sick, COVID-stricken elderly people into the aged care homes. Boris has come under fire for his treatment and, frankly, his, haphazard handling of the NHS, and this has led to a further 42,000 deaths in nursing care homes out of the total 127,000 COVID deaths in the UK. So that's how The Guardian feels about it, but Boris says the commentary doesn't bear any relation to reality.
Thank you for that, Zach. And that's our roundup for today. For the roundup, I'm Sarah Liversidge.
And I'm Kendra Jewell. Thanks to our reporters Emma Fitzgerald and Miriam Geary. We're going to take a short break now, then we'll be back with sport, weather and finance.
Victorians are in their fourth lockdown since the start of their pandemic, and many businesses have been forced to close until the lockdown lifts. This leaves many Victorians without work. Reporter Ryan Samble is across the story. So, Ryan, what is the situation for those people unable to work during the lockdown?
Hi, Yusuf. Yeah, so all non-essential businesses have had to close their doors for the next 7 days due to this circuit breaker lockdown. This leaves a lot of people simply not working. For example, I've spoken to people who work at High Point Shopping Centre just down the road from here, and they say they're losing up to 38 hours of work with no plan B.
Yeah, and what assistance is there available for them?
At the moment, it's not much. You'll know that the federal JobKeeper program ended at the beginning of last month, so essentially many of these workers are left with no assistance whatsoever. Last year, the Victorian government introduced a payment scheme which gave money to people forced to isolate after getting tested, but at this stage, it doesn't appear that the state government will be doing anything similar to help people get through this lockdown. So the only change made so far has been from the federal government, which has suspended the mutual obligations for job seeker and youth allowance payments. And essentially that just means they don't have to go to their scheduled appointments or activities to keep receiving their regular payments.
And how many people is this potentially affecting at the moment?
It is a bit difficult to say as these numbers aren't readily available, but it is assumed that casual workers will be hardest hit, of which there are approximately 500,000 in Victoria. So to go back to the example of High Point, the shopping centre has been almost silent since about Tuesday, and most shops simply closed for the duration of this lockdown. Now, many of the people working there are young casual workers, so that can give you a sense of the scale of this problem.
So businesses and the unions are on a unity ticket on this issue. What are they calling for?
Yeah, it is one of the rare instances where business and the unions are in agreement. Basically, that something needs to be done to keep people afloat financially. As to what they think should be done, the Australian Council of Trade Unions says it wants JobKeeper reinstated. While business groups have been a little bit more fluffy, the Victoria Chamber of Commerce, they aren't as specific, only going so far as to say that there needs to be some kind of support to prevent businesses going bust and workers losing their jobs.
Thanks for that, Ryan.
Our next story takes us to West Brunswick Amateur Football Club, who have started their own Pride Round to support LGBTQ plus people in their community. Liam Healy has the story.
On its surface, West Brunswick Football Club, located just 4 kilometres outside Melbourne CBD, looks like your average local football club. However, it is far from that. The Magpies pride themselves on their ability to be diverse and welcome people from all walks of life to their footy club. President Beth Cook says the club's diversity is a major attraction for new players.
I mean, one of the focuses at West Brunswick is that we're a progressive and inclusive club. I think that has been what has led to us having so many women wanting to come and play here, as well as our inclusive nature.
As well as its commitment to growing the women's game, West Brunswick are committed to the support of LGBTI people, holding their second Pride Round celebration on June 5. Senior women's captain Annie Mack believes the club's diversity has allowed some to fall back in love with the sport.
We've got players that have been turned away from football and been quite disheartened over the years, and it's been pretty special to see those players come back and fall in love with the game again.
All money raised during the Pride Round will go towards Minus 18, an organisation that supports LGBTI youth.
We're playing away in 2019, so it'll be really exciting this year to have it here, where we can fly the Pride flag on our flagpole, throw a bit of support, and then have a bit of a celebration after in the pavilion, which will be really exciting.
Clubs like West Brunswick's commitment to be a more inclusive and inviting community for all should help see the sport of Australian rules football become a more welcoming recreational activity. Liam Healy, Newsline.
And now it's time for sport with reporter Sheridan Van Gelderen joining us for the latest updates.
Melbourne Demons players and staff have returned negative COVID tests, clearing the team to play against Western Bulldogs tonight. This is following news of a Demons player having visited a Tier 1 exposure site on Sunday. This player will still have to self-quarantine for 14 days despite a negative result. The highly anticipated clash between Demons and Bulldogs will be played in an empty Marvel Stadium due to Victoria's snap 7-day lockdown. Taylor Harris is facing a difficult decision after talks with Carlton Blues broke down. This led to her being without a team for the next season of AFLW. Harris now has to either find a new club or take a year off from AFLW, a possibility her manager has said they are taking into consideration. A concern for AFL fans of Harris is whether her boxing commitments may prove to be a more viable option for her career, as experts say asking price is too high for competing clubs to take her on. Scott Pendlebury has laid out his plans for the Collingwood captaincy handover in an interview with SEN's Bob and Andy. Pendlebury has been captain of Collingwood since 2014 and last season surpassed his coach Nathan Buckley for the record of most games played as skipper. Pendlebury hopes to play 1 or 2 seasons after handing over the captaincy role, a move he experienced with Nick Maxwell, the previous Collingwood club captain. When asked who he believes could take on the role, Pendlebury named Taylor Adams and Steele Sidebottom as worthy candidates, calling them fantastic leaders. Tiger Woods has spoken in his first interview since his near-fatal car crash this February. Speaking with Golf Digest, Woods described his rehabilitation process as more painful than he had ever experienced. The rehab is mainly focused on his right leg, which suffered traumatic injuries after the single car crash in Rancho Palos Verdes, California. When asked whether he hoped to play golf again, Woods maintained his number one goal was walking on his own. A Philadelphia 76ers fan has been handed an indefinite ban after dumping popcorn on Washington Wizards player Russell Westbrook. An injured Westbrook had to be restrained from confronting the offender after Game 2 of the Wizards Eastern Conference playoff series against the Sixers at Wells Fargo Center. The fan has had his season ticket revoked, and the Sixers issued an apology to Westbrook and the Washington Wizards, stating there is no place for this type of unacceptable and disrespectful behaviour. That's all for sport. Back to you, Sarah and Youssef.
Gambling has had an unexpected rise during the pandemic as pokies have been open for over a year now after a turbulent lockdown. One area of Melbourne that has been affected the most is Brimbank. Reporter Stephen Ewan has the story.
Brimbank has seen an increase of money losses to gambling as pokies have made their rise during the pandemic. There have been reports of record losses in the months of December 2020 and January 2021, with over $28 million lost to pokies in the 2-month span. The mayor of Brimbank stated that the area had lost more than $1.4 billion over the last decade. Rose O'Leary of the Alliance of Gambling Reform says there are many reasons for the rise of pokies. One of the main factors is the opening hours of these pokies.
Particularly with Brimbank is that there's always a poker machine venue open in Brimbank. Poker machine venues are allowed to be open 20 hours a day in Victoria, which is the longest in the country.
She says that Brimbank has been a target for the pokies as
Brimbank is a highly stressed community even before the pandemic, and industry, the poker machine industry on purpose puts venues in these areas to maximise profits, and that's why this area in particular is experiencing the increase in losses.
Gambling venues in Brimbank, like Killaborough Hotel, had one of the highest expenditures in 2017, with almost $16 million in profit. And Brimbank, with a combined total of 15 venues, had made a sum total of $134 million, while the Greater Geelong had 26 venues, but only made $114 million in the same year. As the pandemic winds down, the effects of gambling will become more apparent, and federal and local governments will need to solve this increasing problem. Stephen Nguyen, Newsline.
And now to finance with Neve Walton. Neve, tell us what's going on with the markets today.
Thanks, Sarah. The ASX 200 is currently up 0.95%, remaining at about 7,162 points. This is the highest day of trading for the ASX 200 this month. The Dow Jones is up 0.41%, while the Nasdaq is down 0.01%, with Nikkei up 1.8%. The Australian dollar is down slightly from yesterday, buying you 77 US cents, 106 New Zealand cents, 63 euro cents, 54 British pence, or 84.52 Japanese yen. Onto commodities, with gold trading at 2,448 Australian dollars an ounce, a decrease of 0.13%. Meanwhile, silver saw a decrease of 0.036%, now at $35.83 an ounce. Brent crude oil is up 0.87%, with WTI crude oil up 0.69%. In today's financial news, Australian betting company BetMakers have entered a $4 billion offer into the bidding war over Tabcorp. BetMakers are the third business to put forward an offer, joining British business Entain and American business Apollo Management. The $4 billion offer would be split. Tabcorp would receive $1 billion in cash and $3 billion in shares. Tabcorp have said that they will be assessing the new offer among the other two they have received. And that's it for finance. Back to you, Sarah and Youssef.
Thanks, Neve.
One of the reasons Melbourne is such a livable city is our parks and green spaces. But are there enough of them? Riley Galloway reports.
The Andrews government has pledged $5 million to plant 500,000 trees across the state's western suburbs
in an effort to tackle the urban heat island effect. This effect involves increased temperatures across our densely populated suburbs due to car pollution, development, and a lack of native vegetation.
As we build more concrete cities, we have more impervious surfaces, which means they're more likely to hold heat and to produce heat and radiate heat. And that has this huge impact on the city and the health of our people and our creatures.
In 2018, Melbourne's west had just 5.5% canopy cover, a drastically low figure compared with other areas of the city. The initiative also aims to increase community access to better parks and cleaner air, which research shows will be critical to better mental and physical health.
What we're seeing is, because the city was planned early, you have these lovely areas of open space across the inner areas of Melbourne. But as we grow, and particularly out in the growth areas, you can see that it's getting more difficult.
Growing up in the western suburbs, it was really not a nice environment to be in. It was really dry, there weren't many trees, and it was just a bit depressing. And I really noticed a change in my mental health when I moved to somewhere close to a park like Edinburgh Gardens, because I just had the option to get it with nature and really just feel connected and grounded again. So yeah, it was a really big shift for me.
The new trees will also create vital new habitats for our local wildlife. Planting will begin in September and is a big step towards cooling and greening our incredible city. Riley Galloway, Newsline.
Now to weather from Melbourne and around the country with reporter Claudia Forsberg.
Tonight it was cloudy in Melbourne with a high of 14 degrees and a low of 5. Pacific capital cities around Australia tomorrow, a 5% chance of rain in Melbourne, reaching 14 degrees. In Sydney, possible showers with a 40% chance of rain and a top of 17. Partly cloudy in Brisbane, tomorrow top of 21. Adelaide, partly cloudy, top of 18. And in Perth, showers and a high chance of rain and thunderstorms, top of 21. Sunny in Darwin and a warm 32. Hobart, partly cloudy and a top of 13. And in the nation's capital, Canberra is mostly sunny with a top of 13 degrees. Looking ahead in Melbourne, we might be stuck indoors for a moment, but at least we can enjoy the warmth inside and the view from our window. Partly cloudy on Saturday, but we'll get a mostly sunny Sunday with a top of 15. Sunny again on Monday, and again on Monday with 15 degrees. Tuesday, partly cloudy, top of 16, with a small chance of rain. Wednesday, a shower or two, and a top of 17. Thursday, showers and 16. That's all for Newsline weather. I'm Claudia Forsberg. Back to you, Sarah and Lisa.
And that concludes Newsline for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sarah Oliver.
And I'm Yusuf Saudi. Stay safe out there.